I'm having a hard time putting this into words, but I do think that you're right, that we have a hard time looking at Tamlin objectively, or at least a lot of the fandom has a hard time looking at Tamlin objectively, because when a lot of us look at Tamlin, we don't see Tamlin the character. We see this amalgamation of all of the shitty things that our exes did to us. Which is why foiling him with Rhysand has some very weird implications, because Tamlin and Rhysand are meant to foil each other within the narrative. They are, at their core, the same. And when one of them gets framed in a way where we can't look at him and not see our ex-boyfriends, and then the other one is framed as like the ideal morally gray book boyfriend, things get a little dicey, and it's very difficult to look at the books objectively that way. So I'm gonna be real, I was never a Tamlin girly. I did not spend any part of ACOWAR 1 looking at Tamlin being like, that's my man, I'm gonna stick beside him. I was a day one Lucien girly because I am a lady of taste and class. Anyway, we go through ACOWAR 1 with Tamlin, and he is set up to be like the romantic interest, and then ACOMAF happens, and Feyre's like, well, shit, this isn't right, I need to get out of here. And we start to see the cracks in Tamlin's narrative at that point, because then that's when he locks her up. That's when he starts being so overprotective of her that she can't even learn about her magic. And she has literally every High Lord magic. She has to learn about it, or else she's going to hurt somebody. Also, all those times that Feyre was like literally sick during the night, and he just kind of like let her rock. And then when he would have nightmares, she wouldn't come to him either. So like they weren't supporting each other in the way that a healthy couple would. So they were just doomed from the start, even if Tamlin hadn't become abusive towards her. As a sidebar, the toilets will never not make me annoyed about the world building, but we're not having that conversation right now. Anyway, we spend all of ACOMAF with Feyre realizing that she deserved better than Tamlin, and then she ends up becoming mated to Rhysand. Fine, cool. And then ACOWAR happens, and then Tamlin actually hits her, and it's shitty, and like we do not love Tamlin's behavior. Like I have thoughts about this. Anyway, we go through ACOWAR, and Tamlin is becoming more and more of a shell of himself. He's becoming a little bit crazier, a little bit more abusive. He's becoming shittier. But then that all culminates at the end of ACOWAR, where Rhysand sacrifices himself, and Feyre's screaming at everybody, bring him back, bring him back, bring him back. And Tamlin's the last one. And Tamlin, this was after he had helped Feyre and Asriel save Elaine and that human girl from Hybern's camp. So like he's already showing his quality at this point, the abuse of Feyre aside. And he's like, be happy, Feyre. And he resurrects Rhysand, and he lets her go. And then Feyre's like, hey, like, I'm happy, and like, thank you for bringing him back, and I hope you're happy too. And that, I hope you will eventually become happy. And that could have been a really good redemption arc for Tamlin, where it's like, oh, like, Tamlin's not going to be that important to the story anymore. We're moving him off. He's going to go and rebuild his court after everything that Feyre did to it now. So, and then we're not thinking about it anymore. But then Rhysand keeps kicking him while he's down in A Court of Frost and Starlight, and he's like, we're interrupting the joy of Christmas for Rhysand to go to the Spring Court every so often and tell Tamlin that he should kill himself, and that even though Feyre forgives him, he never will, and he's a terrible human being, and everyone left him, and it's a good thing. Like, it's basically like it's very strange to me. And the reason why it's strange is because of the way that Rhysand is framed. He should be self-aware enough to know that Tamlin is who Rhysand would have become had he not had a good support system around him, and had Feyre not been his mate. Like, let's be real. If Tamlin and Feyre had been mates, Rhysand would have gone off the deep end. It would have really, really hurt him. And he might have had, especially because Rhysand had that deal with Feyre to begin with. That deal that Rhysand had with Feyre, that she goes over there like for 10 days a month, that still would have been in place had Tamlin and Feyre had been mates. So what would have happened in that scenario? Would Rhysand have just let Feyre go like that? We don't know. And the reason why we don't know is because Tamlin and Rhysand are the same in a lot of ways. And because Tamlin and Rhysand are the same in a lot of ways, narratively, and in the way that they handle things, and the way that when things get weird around their mate, they immediately go to be overprotective to the point where the fandom is like, ooh, I don't know how I feel about that. It's very strange that one of them became like the embodiment of all of our shitty exes, and the other one became the idealized man that kind of everybody wants. I mean, not me, but enough people in the fandom want. And I think if we were able to have a more honest conversation about how Tamlin has become kind of like the punching bag representative of all of our exes, we would be able to have a more honest conversation about whether Tamlin has been redeemed or not, which I think that if Tamlin doesn't come back into the story, Tamlin would have had a good redemption arc in ACOWAR, to the point where like even Feyre has forgiven him. But because Lucien doesn't forgive him and the narrative doesn't forgive him because it continually tries to kick him while he's down and make it so like he has truly not redeemed himself, it makes it feel like Tamlin hasn't done the work to work towards a redemption arc when we know from the text that he has. So I think in a future book, probably the Lucien Vasa novella, I would want to see more evidence of Tamlin's redemption going back to ACOWAR and even before that. And even then, like, the only thing that Tamlin really needed to redeem himself for was his treatment of Feyre, which he did when he resurrected Rhysand and, like, said, be happy and, like, all of that stuff. He doesn't necessarily need to redeem himself for the whole Hybern shit, except for to Nesta and Elaine for their part in it. Because if Rhysand and Feyre had had a brain in their heads during ACOWAR, they could have just checked his brain. Like, we have this whole narrative where Lucien and Feyre, they feel weird just looking into anybody's brain like that because it's invasive and all that. And Feyre does it to Lucien and she doesn't really like how it feels. But at the same time, though, Tamlin is their enemy and they had more than enough reason to look in his head at that point, especially because Lucien didn't even feel it. The fact that Rhysand and Feyre, they didn't even look into Tamlin's brain and see that he was trying to make a play to take down Hybern from the inside, that's a little stupid on their part. And that's part of the reason why they're not very good leaders of the Night Court. But that's another conversation for another day. Anyway, I might not really be a Tamlin girly in the way that other people are Tamlin girlies, and I certainly wouldn't call myself a Tamlin apologist, but I do think that Tamlin isn't looked at objectively in this fandom because when a lot of us look at Tamlin, we do not see Tamlin. We see every iteration of every man who has ever harmed us. And that's not fair so much.